Our next segment is part of our continuing discussion on pensions. Pensions primarily at the state level, and as you know from my perspective, probably the epitome of dysfunction in government these days, the fact that we have this pension systems across the board that are unfunded, and unfunded really for a lot of reasons that are not acceptable. Either governments failed to meet their obligations, they didn't pay attention to some of the details in the beginning, and anyway, we have this morass of pension issues across the country. Today we're going to speak with Elaine Nekritz, a state representative from Illinois who has become an expert on this topic and has been working in the state of Illinois for the past few years to solve issues there. We're going to talk about the pension perspective, from Illinois and maybe branch out a little bit from there. Elaine is one of my all-time favorite legislators, and I was thinking of how to introduce her today, and I had this great idea for a movie kind of metaphor. Now I actually have two movie metaphors, so we'll try them out and see how they work. So the first one is, if you've ever seen the Mary Poppins movie, and Mary Poppins goes to the Banks home, and she's going to be taken after Jane and Michael Banks, and she needs to see how they measure up. So she has this measuring stick, and it comes to Michael or Jane, and it says, talks too much, doesn't eat his peas or whatever, and the other one, is unkempt or whatever it is. And then they want to know about her, so of course it says Mary Poppins, perfect in every way. Practically. All right, there you go. Well, she interrupted me, so she's not perfect. So anyway, I was thinking if you had a legislator measuring stick and you came up to the top of Elaine's head, it would say, Elaine Nekritz, legislator, practically perfect in every way. How's that? But then we were going to do the taping today, and she showed up late. So then the next movie I was thinking about is Lawrence of Arabia, when they've taken Aqaba, and it turns out there's no money in Aqaba, so Anthony Quinn, I can't remember his role, he basically says he is not perfect. So Elaine is somewhere between practically perfect in every way and not perfect. But Elaine, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Nemo. I'm delighted to be joining you.
So I didn't even really give background on you. You're in your 6th term in the state legislature.
Correct.
Assistant Majority Leader.
Yeah.
And chairwoman, are you chairwoman or chairman or chairperson of the Judiciary Committee? What's the
whatever suits your needs.
What's the politically correct answer these days?
I usually just say I chair the Judiciary Committee and the Personnel and Pensions Committee.
Personnel and Pensions Committee. And the reason you chair the Pensions Committee is basically because you were the one that raised your hand. You said this is a tough problem in Illinois, and I'm going to work to solve the problem. Is that a fair characterization?
I think that is, yes.
And from my perspective, in all seriousness, this is really what makes you a great legislator. We've talked on some other shows about the courage word, that many of our legislators today don't have the courage to take on these tough issues and to solve the problems that have to be solved. And that's how I know you and how I think of you. You step into that void, and then you try to fill that void.
Well,
so
I appreciate that.
You're in your 6th term. You started in 2002. When did you start to get a little incensed, if that's too strong a word, about where this pension thing was and the fact that you had to jump in?
It actually started before I was even elected to the legislature. I worked for your friend, State Senator Jeff Schoenberg, before I was elected, and he was involved in the pension issue even then because it was a problem back 15 years ago. And I learned a lot about it working for him and learned how the extent of the problem. And while the solutions that we ultimately came up with, anything the solutions we were considering back then, I was aware that this was a really major problem for Illinois.
One of the we've talked about pension on some other shows, and one of the issues that has come up a few times is this notion of the legislators may not have fully understood what they were voting on, or the facts may not have been presented appropriately. When I was doing some research for today, and you brought Jeff's name into it, I realized how far back this issue went. And Jeff was actually discussing a dynamic from one of the fixes when Ryan was governor, and how the facts changed at the last minute, and everybody voted on thinking they were voting one way, and the bill actually went another way.
Okay.
How much of the problem do you think relates to this complication and the fact that sometimes the estimates or what the legislators think they're voting on don't match up to the reality of what's going on?
Whether it's the state pensions, the county pensions, or the city pensions, we have never really adhered to actuarial science. And that has, and because of that, the projections and the forecasts and the estimates don't really make a lot of sense, and they don't make sense in actual terms. And I think that they were then confusing to legislators. So that's been a problem at all levels of government for us for a very long time.
So as you said, you were interested in the issue before you got elected, and then you were elected. I know since you've been in office, the first attempt at a fix was what, 2010, when they set up a new system for the new employees?
You don't get much credit for it in Illinois, but we changed the pension benefits for new hires in a very dramatic way. And that took effect on January 1 of 2011 for employees hired after that date.
Now, what were some of those fixes? What were we able to do?
We kept the contribution rate for employees the same, but we dramatically increased retirement age. We capped the amount of the salary that would be subject to the pension. We changed the automatic annual increase that the benefit would receive, or that the annuitant would receive once you retired, and so those are the kinds of things that we did. Those are the pretty standard levers that you might pull if you wanted to change the cost of a benefit.
Now, one of the standard levers that a lot of people push is to move from defined benefit to defined contribution. At that point in time, when you were looking at impacting new employees, to what extent did defined contribution enter the equation?
I think one of our goals was to maintain a defined benefit system in a lot of ways, because we have a lot of employees in the state, both the pension system that covers our teachers and the pension system that covers our university employees is not coordinated with Social Security. So we felt it was pretty important to maintain some kind of defined benefit for a secure retirement for those individuals.
And that's an important point. In Illinois, there's not one pension system. There's multiple state-level pension systems, correct?
We have 5 total, yes, for state at the state level.
Do they pretty much work the same way across the board?
They pretty much do. There's some nuanced differences, but pretty much they work the same.
And are they all pretty much behind in the same ratio of funding?
Well, the worst funded system is the one that the General Assembly participates in. That's at about 16% funded right now, but they range up to the mid 40s in terms of their funding.
But that really didn't get to the heart of the matter, which is the existing employees. So somewhere you decided to raise your hand, put your head out of the foxhole, whatever the right analogy is.
We thought the 2010 fix might do it, but then the pension contribution that the state was required to make was still going up dramatically, and so we had to then look at how we might impact those that are currently working for us.
But at some point, and again, I'm trying to give you a little credit here, my sense is you kind of stepped up and tried to force the issue. How did that come about?
Well, I did. One of the business organizations in the state went to work and actually putting together a piece of legislation that was an attempt to deal with this problem and the rapidly rising cost of our pension systems. And it was by no means a perfect bill. It probably wasn't even a good bill. But I decided that as a member, then I wasn't chair of the Pensions Committee, but I decided as a member I was going to vote for it because we needed to demonstrate the seriousness of this problem. And I felt the only way I could do that was to vote for something that, again, I didn't think was a great bill, but I wanted to show that I was serious about solving this problem and that the legislature needed to be as well.
Now, I don't even recall, did that come to a vote?
It came to a vote in the Pensions Committee. It never made it to the floor.
And what was the vote in Pensions Committee?
Oh, I don't remember. That was back in 2011.
Was it, I meant, was it partisan? What was the makeup of the vote on something like that?
I think I was the only Democrat to vote for it.
All right, and that's an issue we talk about a lot on this show from a process perspective. We talk about dysfunction, the need to create these bipartisan solutions. And I know in your mind, not only did you want to solve the pension issue, but you felt it had to be a bipartisan solution.
I felt really strongly about that, and mostly it was the practical reality of getting votes on the bill, that we weren't going to get all Democrats to support this, so we were going to need bipartisan support. So we worked very hard in creating that support.
So this is what, about 2 years ago when this is starting to...
Yeah, 2011 was the first serious attempt at putting together a bill to address the liabilities for current employees.
All right, and then you became chairperson of the committee?
I did, and also the governor created a working group that was also bipartisan and bicameral that had actually just one representative from each of the four caucuses. And we met the entire spring of 2012 to try to come up with a proposal.
So you were on this panel that the governor created. What were some of the issues that the panel thought had to be solved? Obviously, pension reform is a big category. What were some of the subsets that you felt had to be addressed in order to get to ultimate solution?
Well, in Illinois, as you know, we have a constitutional provision that says that the factual right that cannot be diminished or impaired. And so our challenge was to try to come up with a mechanism to make sure that whatever we passed was constitutional. So that we spent a fair amount of time trying to figure that out. And then once we had a structure for how we were going to address that, then the question became what are the specifics of that? And that was the challenge, the way we chose to address it. We chose to tackle it.
And at that point in time, when you defined the problem, was there a number you were trying to solve for in terms of savings, or did you put that at the end?
No, we didn't really know how to grapple with that. And so we didn't do that. We just decided we would come up with a program and then have the actuaries tell us what that did. And that was pretty much the way we proceeded throughout this whole for the last 3 years, was to decide on what we thought we could do constitutionally and get the votes on it, and then have it scored by the actuaries. And then we would go back and tweak it from there.
So obviously one of the fixes that you decided on pretty early on, which is contrary to what you had said happened historically, is you brought actuaries in to make sure you were working within the context of the world of actuaries and actuarial soundness.
We did, and that was a critical part of the decision of the process, was to make sure that we were doing our best to adhere to actuarially sound practices.
Now you mentioned the Illinois Constitution, and for the viewers' benefit, Illinois is a bit unique with respect to its own pension issues because, as you said, the pension actually creates a contractual right that makes it a little tougher to problem solve if you were in a state that didn't have the same constitutional burden.
Of the legalities of it, it's not terribly different than the contracts clause of the U.S. Constitution, but it does create an additional hurdle for us.
So you're working with the governor's group, and you said this was like a year-long process?
No, well, we met during the legislative session for the spring of 2012, basically from February through May.
And it was a bipartisan effort, you said. Members of the Republican and Democrats in both chambers were
Correct.
on the committee. How did you feel the partisan element either helped or hurt as you were working together?
I'm not sure in that debate that it made all that much difference. I think everybody at the table was committed to solving the problems that Illinois faced, and so we got into some ideological differances.
So did this group actually produce a report or a draft
We
legislation?
did. We produced a bill, and that suffered the same fate as the legislation we did in 2011. It got passed out of committee, but it didn't come close to having support on the floor, so that did not move ahead.
So let's back up again. I know we're not here to talk about politics per se, but you can't really talk about the pension issue without understanding the underlying politics. As these bills are not passing, what are the political pressures that are put on legislators to vote against it? What are the arguments being made in those cases?
The arguments being made basically are that it's not constitutional, that you are actually diminishing or impairing benefits, and so you're, as a legislator, you vowed to uphold the Constitution, and you're not. The other is a fairness argument that the employees paid in their share. They were told to expect a benefit, and now you're changing that handshake agreement or that deal. And both of those I think are legitimate concerns. and things that we tried to address.
Yeah, and actually, I think they're beyond legitimate concerns. I would say they're compelling concerns. I mean, they're,
Okay, yes,
how you can't get around them. But on the other
right,
side, Illinois has a dramatic dramatic budget deficit problem, right?
right.
And as you have to keep funding the pension or catch up to past abuses of funding the pension, now you have pressures in the rest of the system.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to talk about that for Illinois is that right now in the current fiscal year we're spending 22 cents of every dollar of every tax dollar pension system, and if we did nothing, that was going to go up to about 30 cents. The average state is spending about 5 cents of every tax dollar on pensions, so it dramatically affects our ability to fund our other core state services.
And in fact, we had an interview with a gentleman from Colorado, and he talked about the same issue, but again, not as nearly dramatic as what you're facing in Illinois.
Right.
So,
and we are far and away the most underfunded of the pension systems across the country.
and I know you and I have talked about this, so obviously you have people that come to lobby you, talk about the Constitution and the fairness, and again, very compelling from my perspective. Is there a lot of groundswell or people showing up on the other side? Is there an energy behind the other side of this debate?
Not really. The public in Illinois gets it. They feel that they know that something needs to be done, but they don't really weigh in on what that looks like. They just want something done, and that makes it challenging because it's hard to know where there's support for the changes.
But let's pick on the teachers. Not that I want to pick on teachers, but I'm a fan of teachers. It seems to me there has to be a normal tension between teachers either retired or getting near retirement and teachers who are just entering the system that want to think they're going to be able to get raises and have money in the classroom. Does that particular tension play out in the discussion?
It really does not. And I would think it might. And I would tell teachers all the time that that's the choices that we were being forced to make, but that really did not resonate as much as you might think.
And that's where I have to give you credit because, the typical legislator likes getting reelected, likes getting votes, likes doing things their constituents support. So if you're only hearing mostly from one side of a debate, normally that's the side of the debate that's going to sway the argument in the legislature.
Yeah.
But I know you felt very strongly we had to solve this problem. So how did you ultimately did get the problem solved? That we were now, in the summer of 12 the last time you had us?
Right.
Okay, and then Illinois passed a new solution in the fall of 12, or was that in January?
No, in December of 2013, actually.
December of 2013. Oh boy,
Yeah.
I'm way off. Okay, so we have to bridge a year and a half in here. I don't know if we have time. All right, so how did you get from the government's group not solving the problem to, I know, there actually became kind of an Elaine, Nekritz, Tom Cross, who was the Republican leader, version of a plan, and the Senator Cullerton, who heads up the Senate, had a version of the plan. I don't have enough time to cover the whole 18 months. I'm off by a year here, but walk us through some of the process steps and how you actually got to solve the problem ultimately.
Basically, there was a frustration by rank and file legislators, and frankly, it was Democrats, that the problem was not being solved, and we were hearing from people, why aren't you solving problems? Why aren't you getting this done? And so we went to the drawing board, and unlike most big issues where legislators look to leadership to develop the solution, we developed our own solution, and we drafted a bill. We rallied support around it, and
Let me
December.
Let me interrupt for just 1 second. Tell us who we is at this point. Obviously, you're maybe the head of we or one of the leaders of we. Who's we?
It was primarily driven by myself and Senator Daniel Biss from Evanston. But we had a strong group with us. I mean, there were 10 or 12 other rank and file House Democrats that were part of this decision, deciding like what we were going to put in a bill and how we were going to proceed. So we introduced our legislation in December of 2012. We got it scored by the actuaries, and we brought it on board with us. That was a challenge to get even any bipartisan support. And we then worked it and brought in new players. And as you said, the then minority leader Tom Cross came on board to to negotiate with us. We modified the bill to incorporate some changes that he wanted, but we could never quite get the support. We could get bills out of committee routinely, but we couldn't get the support on the floor. Ultimately, the speaker went through a very lengthy education process with our caucus, and the Republicans got some things in there that they wanted, and we finally, back in December of 13, got the bill passed at a special session.
And congratulations for doing that. And I know you're going fast there, and we kind of jumping ahead, but the reality is it took a bipartisan effort, and it took a combination of rank and file putting pressure on leadership, which is pretty uncommon these days.
Yeah.
And then leadership coming in to fill the remaining void to get a problem solved.
Correct. That was really, if you can bore down on it, that was at the core of it.
Which is really a lot different than the history over the last so many years of how difficult problems have been solved. To a certain extent, it's because the Democrats control the majority in both legislatures. They've had to step up and put almost all the votes on most of the key legislation that's occurred.
Right.
But in this case, you had a mix, Republican and Democrat, and really upstate, downstate, if I remember. It was a good cross-section of the state.
It was, and we really had to do that. There was no way you were going to get 60 Democrats to support a change to the pensions of one of its core constituencies, the public employee unions.
You did all this legislation, and you're now in the courts. The bill's being challenged, correct? And we know that's a tough road in and of itself. So let me back you up a second and ask, at what point in time, if at all, did people talk about whether or not you should just go to a straight constitutional amendment to solve this problem?
We had, when the governor convened that working group back in 2012, we had some discussion about that. And I think that what the lawyers indicated to us was it probably wouldn't make that much difference because the constitutional protection is there. And to eliminate it doesn't change the fact that it's been there up until now. So what changes could you make? If you eliminate it, you still have to face that question of what changes can you make?
In light of this most recent decision in Illinois, I don't want to belabor the viewers, there's been a kind of a one-sided decision in Illinois that favors the constitutional approach. Do you have any second thoughts about how you did this and whether or not you should have entertained that?
I don't know. I don't. I think that it's always hard to change the Constitution. I'm not sure that we could get it done. You need a supermajority in each house. In the House and the Senate, and we could barely get the votes on a statutory change. I think the political hurdles would have been the same, and I think the legal challenges would have been the same. So I don't regret that decision.
Now we've had a group in Illinois come forward this year with a petition on redistricting. We've had another group come forward with a petition on term limits. Seems as though they may have their own problems. But do you think if the courts rule totally against all this legislation, you would see an independent group that might step forward to amend the Constitution?
It would not surprise me. I certainly think that's a possibility. Again, it's a hurdle to try to get the signatures to get the courts to approve such a change, and then to get 60% of Illinois citizens to vote for it.
Yeah, it's going to be tough no matter how you do it. Well, anyway, I want to applaud you for your great work. I'm a fan.
Thanks,
we know you're practically perfect, and the fact that you would step up and really show the courage to lead on an issue, I think we need more of that. And I wish you well as you move through your next problem, your next dilemma, your next debacle, whatever comes next.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I need all that good luck.
And after the courts decide your case, maybe you'll come back for a rematch. Hopefully you won't have to come back for a rematch because you'll win. But otherwise, maybe we'll have you come back for a rematch and we'll talk about what next steps might have to be.
Sounds great.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks, Nemo.